The restaurant opened its doors every morning the same way. Chairs were turned down from tables, lights were switched on one by one, and the smell of fresh bread slowly filled the air. It was a place people came to relax, eat, and talk. Music was never the main attraction. Most days it was just quiet background sounds and soft noise from the kitchen. She arrived early as always. Her uniform was clean, neatly pressed, and plain. Nothing about her stood out at first glance. She moved with calm focus, tying her apron, checking her section, making sure glasses were polished and menus were straight. To most people, she was just another server starting another long shift. She did her job well. She remembered orders, smiled politely, and walked from table to table without complaint. Customers often noticed how gentle her voice was, how patient she seemed even when the place got busy. But no one ever guessed there was more to her than this daily routine. In the corner of the restaurant stood an old piano. It wasn't there for shows or events. It was more like decoration, a piece of the past that stayed because no one bothered to remove it. Some days, people placed their coats on it or leaned menus against it. The keys were slightly worn, and the wood had faded over time. She noticed that piano every day. Whenever she passed it, her eyes would rest on it for just a second longer than usual. Not enough for anyone to notice, but enough for her to feel something deep inside. It reminded her of quiet nights, tired hands, and moments she never talked about. Moments that belonged to another part of her life. She never mentioned it to anyone. Not to the other staff. Not to the manager. She kept that part of herself locked away, like something fragile that could break if spoken out loud. Life hadn't been easy. She took the job because she needed stability. Bills had to be paid. Responsibilities didn't wait for dreams. So she chose the safe path, the one that made sense. Serving tables wasn't what she imagined for herself when she was younger, but it was honest work, and it kept her going. During the busiest hours, she barely had time to think. Plates went out, orders came in, and the kitchen called for pickups. Her feet ached by the end of the day, but she rarely showed it. She listened more than she spoke, absorbing the sounds of laughter, complaints, and everyday conversations around her. Sometimes customers were kind. Sometimes they weren't. She handled both with the same calm expression. When someone snapped at her, she didn't argue. When someone thanked her, she nodded with a soft smile. It was as if she had learned long ago how to stay quiet and steady, no matter what. The other workers saw her as dependable. She never called in late. She never caused trouble. She filled in shifts when asked. If there was music playing from a speaker, she worked through it without comment. No one knew that her ears were trained to hear more than just noise. On slower afternoons, when the restaurant wasn't full, she would sometimes wipe the same table twice without realizing it. Her thoughts drifted to places she didn't allow herself to visit often. To rooms filled with silence. To sounds that once made her feel alive. She had learned long ago that talking about dreams often led to disappointment. So she stopped sharing them. Over time, even she started believing they were no longer important. One evening, as the crowd thinned and the sky outside turned orange, she walked past the piano again. A customer's child pressed one of the keys, making a sharp, uneven sound. The parent quickly apologized and pulled the child away. She froze for a moment. That single sound echoed inside her longer than it should have. It stirred memories she worked hard to ignore. Her hands felt warm, almost restless. She took a slow breath and continued toward the kitchen, pushing the feeling aside. The manager spoke nearby, talking about reservations and closing time. The staff laughed about something she didn't catch. Life moved on just as it always did. Later that night, when the restaurant was nearly empty, she stood near the piano again, holding a tray. No one asked her to be there. No one told her to leave. It was just another quiet moment in a long day. She looked at the keys, then away. She reminded herself why she was there. This wasn't her place to dream. This was her job. And yet, something felt different. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way the lights reflected off the polished floor. Or maybe it was the feeling that moments don't always wait for permission. She finished her shift and stepped outside into the cool air. The city hummed around her, full of people chasing their own paths. She walked home slowly, her thoughts heavy but calm. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Her mind replayed the sound of that single piano key over and over. She wondered when she had stopped believing that parts of her still mattered. She didn't know it yet, but this was the last ordinary day she would have at that restaurant. The next shift would change everything. The next morning felt no different on the outside. The restaurant doors opened, the lights came on, and the day slowly began. She arrived on time, tied her apron, and took her place like always. But inside, something was shifting. It was quiet, subtle, but real. She tried to focus on work. Orders, tables, smiles. The routine was familiar, almost automatic. Yet every now and then, her eyes drifted toward the corner of the room. The piano sat there in the same place, silent and patient, as if it had been waiting. She told herself not to think about it. Thinking led to memories, and memories led to feelings she had learned to bury. Still, the sound from the night before stayed with her. One simple key. One short note. It had opened a door she had kept closed for a long time. During a short break, she stood near the window and watched people pass by outside. Everyone seemed to be rushing somewhere, carrying bags, talking on phones, moving with purpose. She wondered how many of them were doing what they truly wanted, and how many were just doing what life demanded. She remembered when music was not just a thought in her head, but part of her daily life. Back then, her hands would move freely, her mind quiet and focused. Playing made the world slow down. It gave her something that words never could. Those days felt far away now. Life had pulled her in a different direction. Family needs, money worries, and unexpected responsibilities had all come at once. There was no dramatic choice, no clear moment where she gave up her dream. It happened slowly, piece by piece. First, practice became less frequent. Then it stopped altogether. The piano she once knew became a memory instead of a habit. She told herself it was temporary, that she would return to it someday. But days turned into years. At work, she listened as coworkers talked about their plans. Some wanted better jobs. Some wanted time off. Some just wanted the day to end. She rarely joined these conversations. Not because she didn't care, but because her thoughts lived somewhere else. Later that afternoon, a customer asked about the piano. They wondered if anyone ever played it. One of the staff laughed and said it was just there for looks. No one thought much of it. She stayed quiet. Her hands felt slightly tense as she carried plates back to the kitchen. She noticed how carefully she held them, how steady her movements were. These were the same hands that once moved across keys with ease. The thought made her chest feel tight. As the evening approached, the restaurant grew busier. Conversations mixed with the clinking of dishes and soft background noise. She moved through it all, focused but distant. A small moment caught her off guard. While clearing a table near the piano, her sleeve brushed against its side. The contact was brief, but it sent a familiar feeling through her arm. She paused, then continued working, hoping no one noticed. She didn't want attention. Attention had a way of asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. When the rush slowed, the room softened. Fewer voices, less movement. She stood behind the counter for a moment, breathing in the calm. The piano was close now, close enough that she could see the worn keys clearly. Some were slightly yellowed. Others carried small marks from years of use. She imagined what it would feel like to sit there again, to let her fingers rest on the keys. Just for a moment, just to remember. Her heart beat faster at the thought. Then reality pulled her back. She reminded herself that this wasn't a concert hall. This wasn't her space. She was hired to serve tables, not play music. Still, something inside her pushed gently, like a quiet voice that refused to be ignored. Later that night, after most customers had left, the manager walked by and mentioned how quiet the place felt. There was no anger in the tone, just an observation, passing comment. She nodded and continued wiping a table. The lights felt warmer now, the air calmer. It was one of those rare moments when time slowed without warning. She found herself standing in front of the piano again. No one asked her to move. No one told her to stop. The room seemed to hold its breath. She didn't sit down. Not yet. Her fingers hovered above the keys without touching them. Her mind filled with doubts. What if she had forgotten everything? What if she sounded terrible? What if someone laughed? She pulled her hand back. Then she took a deep breath. She reminded herself that this was not about proving anything. It was just about feeling something real again. She sat. The bench felt familiar even after all this time. She placed her hands on her lap and closed her eyes for a brief second. The restaurant faded into the background. Her fingers moved slowly at first, pressing one key, then another. The sound was soft, almost fragile, but it was real. She didn't look around. She focused only on the piano, on the space between each note, on the feeling she thought she had lost. A few customers noticed. One stopped talking mid-sentence. Another leaned back in their chair. No one said a word. She continued, letting her hands remember what her mind had tried to forget. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about work, or money, or tomorrow. She was just there in that moment. She didn't know how long she played. Time felt different now. When she finally stopped, the room was silent. She opened her eyes and stood up quickly, her heart racing. She expected questions, or complaints, or someone telling her she wasn't allowed to do that. Instead, she saw something else. People were smiling. Not the polite kind, the real kind. She stepped away from the piano and returned to work, unsure of what would come next. But one thing was clear. She had crossed a line she could never fully step back from, and nothing would feel the same again. The next day arrived with a strange mix of calm and tension. She felt it the moment she stepped inside the restaurant. Nothing had changed, yet everything felt different. The chairs were still in place. The smell of food still drifted through the air. But the silence around the piano felt heavier, like it was holding a secret. She kept her head down and focused on work. She didn't know if anyone would say something about the night before. Maybe no one cared. Maybe it had only mattered to her. That thought brought both relief and disappointment. As the day went on, she noticed small looks being thrown her way. Not obvious, not rude, just curious. A coworker asked if she was tired. Another smiled for no clear reason. No one mentioned the piano. Still, she felt seen in a way she wasn't used to. By evening, the restaurant was fuller than usual. Some tables seemed to stay longer, ordering extra drinks, talking quietly, waiting for something they couldn't explain. She moved between them, doing her job, feeling a quiet energy building under the surface. The piano sat untouched. She avoided looking at it, afraid that if she did, her nerves would show. She reminded herself that last night wasn't planned. It just happened. It didn't mean anything had to happen again. But life doesn't always listen to reason. A customer near the corner asked if the piano ever got played. Before anyone else could answer, another customer said they thought they heard it the night before. Their voice wasn't loud, but it carried. The room shifted. A few heads turned. Someone nodded. Another leaned forward, interested. The idea spread quickly, like a soft ripple moving across the room. She felt her chest tighten. She wanted to disappear behind the counter, to return to being invisible. But something else was happening now. Something she couldn't control. The manager glanced toward the piano, then toward her. There was no anger in that look, just surprise and curiosity. She kept working, her hands steady even though her heart wasn't. She told herself to breathe, to stay grounded. A little later, during a quiet pause, someone gently clapped. Just once. Not loud. Almost playful. Another joined in, laughing softly. It wasn't pressure. It was encouragement. She froze. The sound echoed louder than she expected. Her face felt warm. She shook her head slightly, pretending not to notice. But the room didn't move on. The clapping stopped, replaced by silence. The kind of silence that waits. She looked at the piano without meaning to. The bench stood there, simple and worn. The keys reflected the soft lights above. It didn't feel like decoration anymore. Felt like an invitation. She hesitated. Then she remembered how it felt the night before. The calm. The truth of it. She placed her tray down and slowly walked toward the piano. Every step felt heavier than the last. Her hands trembled slightly, but she didn't stop. She sat down. The restaurant seemed to fade. Conversations stopped. Even the kitchen noise softened. She rested her fingers on the keys, taking a moment to steady herself. She wasn't thinking about impressing anyone. She just wanted to be honest. The first notes were gentle, familiar. They flowed like a quiet story, one that didn't need words. The sound filled the room, not loud, but deep. People leaned back in their chairs. Some closed their eyes. Others watched her hands move, slow and sure. She played with feeling, letting years of silence pour out through the keys. Every note carried something real, something lived. The music didn't rush. It breathed. She forgot where she was, forgot who was watching. In that moment, there was only the piano and the sound it made. When she finished, the silence returned. But this time it was different. Then came the applause. Not sudden, not forced. It grew naturally, like people waking up from a shared dream. Smiles spread. Someone stood up. Another wiped their eyes without realizing it. She stood quickly, unsure of what to do. Her heart raced. She felt exposed and proud at the same time. She stepped away from the piano, returning to her workspace. The applause slowly faded, replaced by excited whispers and quiet praise. Customers asked simple questions. Did she play often? How long had she been learning? She answered politely, keeping her responses short. She wasn't ready to explain her whole life. The manager approached her later, speaking calmly. There was no warning, no complaint, just a simple acknowledgement. A nod, a look of respect. She felt something shift inside her. A weight she didn't know she was carrying lifted slightly. As the night went on, people stayed longer. Some asked if she would play again. She smiled but didn't promise anything. She finished her shift feeling both exhausted and alive. The walk home felt lighter than usual. The city lights seemed brighter. The noise felt less heavy. At home, she sat quietly, thinking about what had happened, about the people who listened, about the feeling she thought was gone forever. She didn't know what this meant for her future. She didn't know if this was just a moment or the start of something new. But she knew one thing. She was no longer invisible. And once a voice is heard, it never truly goes silent again. The days that followed did not return to normal. She tried to keep her routine the same, but the restaurant felt different now. People looked at her longer. Some smiled before she even reached their table. A few whispered to each other, glancing toward the piano and then back at her. She still served food, carried plates, and wiped tables. She still tied her apron the same way and checked her section before each shift. But something quiet had changed inside her. She felt it in the way she stood a little straighter, in the way her steps felt lighter. Word spread without effort. A short video appeared online, taken from the back of the room. The sound wasn't perfect, but the feeling was there. People shared it with simple captions. No big promises, just surprise. She didn't post it herself. In fact, she didn't even know about it at first. A coworker mentioned it during a break, holding up a phone with wide eyes. She watched for a moment, embarrassed and unsure. Seeing herself from the outside felt strange, like looking at someone else's life. She asked them to stop showing it. Not because she was angry, but because she wasn't ready. Attention felt heavy even when it was kind. That evening, more people came than usual. Some ordered food. Some only ordered drinks. A few sat close to the piano, pretending not to wait. She felt the pressure building, but no one demanded anything. That made it harder. Expectations don't always come with words. When the moment felt right, she played again. Not long, not loud, just enough to fill the room with warmth. Applause followed, softer this time, like people were trying not to scare something delicate away. She thanked them with a small nod and returned to work. The manager spoke with her later, carefully choosing words. There was no talk of contracts or promises, just questions. Did she enjoy playing? Would she be open to doing it sometimes? She answered honestly. She said she wasn't sure yet. That night, she went home feeling torn. Part of her felt joy she hadn't known in years. Another part felt fear. Attention can lift you up, but it can also pull you apart. She thought about her past, about how music once meant everything to her, about how quickly life had pushed it aside. She wondered if it was safe to open that door again. Over the next week, people continued to come. Some recognized her, some didn't, but the feeling remained. Something honest lived in that space now. She started practicing again at home, quietly, late at night. Her fingers felt stiff at first, but memory returned faster than she expected. Each session left her both tired and peaceful. She didn't tell many people. This was still hers. One afternoon, an older customer stayed after closing time. They spoke gently, not wanting to overwhelm her. They said they had spent their life around music. They said her playing felt real. She listened, unsure how to respond. They didn't offer money or fame, just encouragement, just belief. That stayed with her. Soon, small opportunities appeared. A local place asked if she would play for a short evening set. Nothing fancy, nothing guaranteed. She hesitated for days before responding. Saying yes felt like stepping into cold water. She continued working at the restaurant. She didn't quit. She didn't make big announcements. She balanced both worlds, unsure which one would last. Some nights were overwhelming. She felt watched. She felt judged. Other nights, she felt deeply connected to the room, to the people listening. She learned that not everyone would understand her journey. Some thought she should move faster. Some thought she should stay where she was. She learned to listen to herself instead. One evening, as she played, she noticed a young person standing near the piano, eyes wide, hands clasped tightly. The look felt familiar. After the song ended, she smiled at them. It was a small moment, but it mattered. She realized then that this was bigger than her fear, bigger than attention. Music wasn't about being seen. It was about being felt. She still went home tired. She still worried about bills and tomorrow. But something inside her felt steady now. She wasn't chasing a spotlight. The spotlight had simply found her. And she was learning how to stand in it without losing herself. The following weeks became a quiet whirlwind for her. The restaurant was no longer just a place to work. It had become a stage, a space where her music lived alongside the aroma of food and the chatter of customers. She still tied her apron every morning and started her day like always. But the air around her felt different. People watched her differently. They weren't just watching a server. They were watching someone who could create something beautiful with her hands. She felt the weight of that attention, but she didn't let it overwhelm her. Instead, she learned to move through it. Plates still needed to be carried, orders still needed to be remembered, and tables still needed to be wiped. But now, between the routine, she found moments to breathe and think about the music that had been part of her life long before this job. Some evenings, the restaurant was crowded with regulars and new visitors who had heard about the piano. Some stayed just to hear her play. Others came to see the quiet determination of a person who had lived most of her life in the background but could step forward and captivate everyone in a single melody. She played softly, letting her music tell the story she hadn't yet found words for. And she felt a sense of freedom she hadn't known in years. She continued practicing at home, finding comfort in the solitude. Each night, her fingers rediscovered the keys, remembering old rhythms and exploring new ones. It was private, personal, and yet it prepared her for moments when the room fell silent and all eyes turned toward the piano. She realized that even small efforts could lead to something larger than herself. One afternoon, after a long shift, the manager approached her with a gentle smile. He didn't speak about fame or opportunity. He simply acknowledged her talent, reminding her that what she brought to the restaurant was special. His words weren't flashy or dramatic, but they carried weight. She realized that sometimes acknowledgement was all it took to build courage. The local community began to take notice as well. A small event planner approached her with an invitation to play at a local gathering. It wasn't a big stage, just a modest room with chairs and soft lighting. but she felt the stirrings of possibility. She hesitated for a few days, unsure if she was ready to step out beyond the familiar walls of the restaurant. Finally, she agreed. She wanted to try, not for fame, not for money, but for the sheer act of sharing her music with people who were willing to listen. That night, as she played, the room was quiet. Every note carried through the space, and she noticed the faces around her relax, smiles spreading naturally. It wasn't just the sound, it was the connection. People felt what she played, and that made her feel alive in a way that work alone never had. Back at the restaurant, things continued to shift. Regulars no longer saw her only as the person who brought them their meals. She became part of the atmosphere, a subtle highlight of the evening. Some days were busy and loud, others slow and reflective. She adjusted with patience, balancing work and her music without letting one overwhelm the other. She began noticing the small, meaningful reactions more than the large ones. A child's eyes widening as she played a gentle tune. An older couple holding hands, nodding to the rhythm. A stranger quietly tapping their fingers on the table, lost in thought. These moments reminded her why she had started playing music in the first place. Not for applause, not for recognition, but for the unspoken connection it created. Her life outside the restaurant also began to shift subtly. She felt more confident in everyday conversations, more willing to express small opinions she had once held back. Music had become a bridge, helping her reconnect with parts of herself that had been dormant for years. She realized that talent, once nurtured and shared, had the power to change not only the world around her, but also the way she saw herself. People continued to record snippets of her playing, sharing them online with gentle respect. She never sought it, but she accepted it gracefully. Comments appeared, praising her skill, her humility, her honesty. The attention was different now, supportive rather than intrusive, encouraging rather than demanding. Felt like a gift rather than a burden. One evening, after closing, she lingered by the piano, fingers hovering above the keys. She reflected on how far she had come, from a quiet server trying to survive the day to someone who could quietly hold the attention of a room. She realized that her journey wasn't about being discovered by the world, but about rediscovering herself. Each note she played reminded her of resilience, courage, and the joy of doing something purely because it mattered to her. Her life didn't become perfect overnight. Bills still needed paying, responsibilities still waited, and challenges remained. But music offered a refuge, a consistent source of strength and inspiration. She discovered that when she embraced her talent without fear, the world responded in ways she had never expected. Over time, she began to accept invitations to play at small community events, school gatherings, and local celebrations. Each time, she approached it cautiously, preferring honesty over showmanship. Her goal was never to impress, but to touch, to give people a moment of pause, a gentle reminder of beauty in ordinary life. At the restaurant, she continued serving tables with the same care and patience, blending work and art seamlessly. Her colleagues grew to admire her not just for her talent, but for the quiet strength it took to balance her responsibilities while nurturing her passion. Customers came for food but stayed for the warmth she brought to the room. She learned to navigate attention with humility. She remained grounded, remembering the quiet nights at home when only the keys and her thoughts were company. Fame had not reached her in the way she once imagined it. Instead, a subtle, meaningful recognition had blossomed around her life, changing it gently but profoundly. Through it all, she never lost sight of the simple truth she had rediscovered. Music mattered because it was a gift she could give, not because it demanded recognition. The restaurant, the piano, the people. It was all part of the world she could touch and shape, quietly, sincerely, and with care. Her journey had begun as a quiet job to pay bills, but it transformed into a story of rediscovery and gentle triumph. Each day, she served tables with the same dedication as before, but now with music in her heart, a light in her step, and a newfound sense of purpose that made her ordinary life extraordinary. She had learned that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the moments that change everything. And sometimes, all it took was a single note, played softly, to remind the world and herself of the beauty that had been there all along.